Okay, we're ready to begin. Good morning, everybody. Welcome again, and thank you for joining us this month to our
Estamos,
Business and Breakfast.
estamos listos para comenzar. Buenos días a todos y todas. Muchas gracias por unirse a nosotros esta mañana.
Before we begin, I'm just going to take us through a little bit of our functions for our Zoom webinar, and then we will give the floor over to our guest, Claudia Paul from, oh, I forgot that. I'm sorry. Can you say the name of the language service? I always forget the order of it. Thank you.
It's okay.
Antes de comenzar, vamos a revisar las funciones de interpretación y de este webinar de Zoom. Y luego comenzará Claudia Paul, nuestra presentadora hoy de Global Language Services.
I will share my screen to go over those functions.
Compartiré mi pantalla aquí para revisar las funciones de Zoom.
Okay, and we do have Global Language Services with Claudia Paul today. Just wanted to introduce them briefly. Global Language Services offers interpreting, translation, and consulting. You can find their webpage at velascocolorado.com. Just a little more, Global Language Services is a supporter of language justice for everyone, where everyone's opinion, sorry about that. I have the, there you go, where everyone's opinions are heard, valued, and respected. They also believe in creating opportunities for participation and increased community engagement by non-English speakers.
Hoy nuestra presentadora viene de Global Language Services. Global Language Services ofrece interpretación, traducción y consultas. Ustedes pueden ver su sitio web en velascocolorado.com. Global Language Services apoya la justicia del lenguaje, donde todas las opiniones de las personas se oyen, son valoradas y son respetadas. También creemos en crear oportunidades para la participación, aumentar la participación comunitaria para personas de habla hispana.
And this is a webinar. We do have chat options. If you have any questions or comments to share, just use our chat functions. You'll be able to see them with the little chat icon.
En esta reunión tendremos la opción de escribir en el chat. Si tienen cualquier comentario o cualquier pregunta, la pueden escribir en el chat.
And we also have a Q&A. If you have any questions for us to get back to at some point in the webinar, you can ask them here, and they will be saved for us to be able to answer them at some point in the webinar.
También tenemos la función de QIA o hacer pregunta y luego recibir la respuesta. Si usted tiene una pregunta durante el transcurso de la reunión, puede escribir su pregunta aquí y la responderemos después.
I will stop sharing, and I am going to turn on our language interpretation now. Let me go ahead and turn it off. You'll have this will be interpreted in English and Spanish in real time. You have a little icon that's a gridded globe at the bottom right of your screen. You can choose your language channel, English or Spanish, and that'll be available just in a minute when I turn it on.
Esta reunión será interpretada al inglés y el español simultáneamente. Puede usted prender esa función de interpretación usando el icono del globo a la parte inferior de su pantalla. Ahí puede elegir su idioma, inglés o español. Eso va a aparecer en un momento cuando yo prenda esa función de Zoom.
Thank you, and we are ready to begin. Claudia, it's all yours.
Yes, I was just choosing my preferred language. So, hi everyone, I'm Claudia Paul. I'm here representing Global Language Services, like Alex said. I'm really happy to be here to share with you guys some of the experiences we've had in having effective meetings. And like Alex titled, Making Friends with the Mute Button. So I'm going to start sharing a few slides so that you can walk us through my presentation. Let me know if at any point you have any trouble seeing. Here we go. So once again, I'm with Global Language Services. Again, we are doing this bilingually. We do have interpreters on the other channel, and you will be noticing that the slides are bilingual as well for your convenience. So let's begin. First of all, it would be very recommended for us to have some kind of a format when we are trying to put a meeting together, a webinar. So some of the steps that we like to use is to have preparation ahead of time. So we want to talk about whether you are going to have it as a webinar or as a meeting, which people are going to come to be part of your supportive team. Are you going to be able to test this ahead of time? Make sure that you have the time, and then do you have a plan B? What if your presenter is unable to connect, something's going on, and you cannot hear them anymore? So what do you do at that point? And then our other step that we like to have is to be ready to pivot. If in the event that things just aren't working for you, what are you going to do in that situation? What would you like to pivot over to? Do you want to continue your meeting? Would you like to perhaps have an open conversation while your presenter reconnects, or while the video is being set up, or something like that? Those are just little examples. So moving over to the next one, if we go a little bit deeper in planning and preparing, some of the things that we like to prepare way ahead of time is decide, like I mentioned before, are we going to have this as a webinar, or is it going to be a meeting? Are we using slides? Some of this information may be stuff that we are already doing, but maybe not necessarily in a format that is organized, or like a list that we can check off on the things that we usually do for our meetings. Especially if you're in a setting where it's internal meetings, having a format of all the different things to check off could be very beneficial, because you can just assign different responsibilities and check off the different things that are already taken care of and know that you're good to go before your meeting. Your video, your audio, are you going to be using a video that's on the web? You're going to share your own video, and from what device, and is it compatible with the meeting that you are hosting? It's very important that we test that ahead of time to make sure that everyone can hear it and they have a good experience in your meeting with the information that you're presenting. Also, will you be using a third-party support? So in the case of, like today, with interpretation, if you are going to have interpretation at your meeting, you want to make sure that you make contact with them ahead of time, find out if they need anything from you for the meeting, how many members of the interpreting team are you going to need, depending on how long your meeting is, and also that you are familiarized with how the system works. If you haven't used it before, it would be a good idea to set up a time to do a quick run-through with your third-party service, whatever that may be, to make sure that you are familiar with how their services work and that you are good to go by the time that your meeting is ready. Also, will you be having a panel of guests if you are doing a webinar, for example? Do they all have different information they want to share? And then going back to the first couple of topics, are they going to be sharing slides or videos or audio or whatever the content may be? You just want to make sure that you check all those boxes before you move forward with the meeting, just to make sure that you are good to go with everything. And then also, if you're going to have it as an open conversation, what does that look like? Who is going to be able to speak when the conversation starts? Are you going to allow your guests, your attendees, to have direct conversation with your panelists, or will someone be monitoring the Q&A like Alex is doing for us today? Those are just little pointers that we like to do. In our case, for Global Language Services, we have this generic message that we always use for our meetings that has the information about how to use your interpreting settings and we like to use that at the beginning of the meetings so that everyone can see it both in English and Spanish. We also plug that into the chat so that when other attendees are coming in later during the meeting, they can still have the instructions, be able to choose their preferred language, and still participate in the meeting. So that's what that looks like. Going back to planning, I made a little chart, and yours can look very differently than this one. This is just an example that we can use to run our regular meetings. So, for example, I have here the responsibilities or the duties, who will be assigned to do those, and then more details if necessary. This happened to be bilingual. That's why there's the black and the blue. The blue is the Spanish version, as you can see. But it is important to have a plan ahead of time as to what you'll be doing to participate in this meeting. So if we just go down the list here, Sandra is my host for this particular meeting that I'm setting up, and she will make sure that she's monitoring the meeting flow and she's keeping everyone on task. So that could mean that she has been in contact with all the different panelists, and she knows what everyone will be sharing and how much time that will take, or how much time they need for each segment, or any other details like that. My co-host is going to be John, and also I put Sandra in there in the event that John is not available or he's busy with something else. Sandra can also take over, and so he will be managing the Q&A and the chat. So even though Sandra is hosting and speaking to the audience and speaking to the panelists, John can be doing a quick job of checking the Q&A and the chat, and also having a conversation with Sandra about it so that it is part of the conversation as a whole in the meeting. Also, we can take notes for the meeting. I know that's kind of old school, but we also have the option to just save the chat on Zoom, because that is an option that we have, as well as recording the meetings. So we have options. If, say, Mandy prefers to do handwritten notes, well, there you go. You would have her assigned to do that, especially if you're taking down some contact information from your attendees, or maybe some information from your panelists that you didn't have before that needs to be followed up on. So that's just an example there. You want to also make sure that you have a tech support. Who is going to be the person that we go to in case my computer or my Zoom is not working, or I'm not clicking the right thing, or I'm not hearing you, but I can see everything else. That happens very often. And a lot of times it's human error. We're just not clicking the right options. We're not necessarily familiar with what's going on with Zoom. They keep upgrading, so it's not unlikely that they will have new buttons and different options every time you sign in. They're just always upgrading, and it's good to have someone to go to help you and give you a quick answer so that you can continue participating in the meeting, especially if you are a presenter or one of
Especialmente si eres un panelista o presentador.
Timekeeper is also Sandra. If we have a panel, per se, of panelists, and we're only going to give them 5 minutes, it's important to let them know that ahead of time, and also to verbalize that when the meeting is happening if they happen to go past their time. We obviously don't want to be rude. We would very politely would say something like, you have 10 seconds, or that was 5 minutes, we're going to go over to our next presenter, or something like that. Most everyone is very comfortable with this, and it's just also just a good habit, good practice to make sure that you stay on task and that you keep time for your meeting so that we can respect everyone's time that is participating, both as an attendee, presenter, and then your third-party services. Communication. I have John here for communication as well. In the event that someone is not able to connect, or they were in the meeting and all of a sudden they get booted out, or they are unable to get back on, we want to make sure that we have a phone number so that we can text each other or call each other. That just ensures that we can troubleshoot very quickly so we can get our presenters back on and continue the meeting. Especially here where we live in the mountains, we've noticed that there has been situations where our presenters could be in their home up in the mountain and they're doing perfectly fine for the first 10 minutes, and suddenly their connection it's iffy, or it's not working anymore, or the audio starts failing, and there's different things that we can do to get back on track, but we couldn't do that if we don't communicate with each other. So it's good to just have that as a backup. Again, these are all good habits, good practices that we've learned because we've been doing this since the pandemic started, and we have dealt with a lot of situations. Sorry about that. I'll go back. I accidentally did that. So it's just good habits, good practices so that you can be prepared and ready to go in the event that this happens or that happens, and we can troubleshoot it quickly and get right back on track. Our slides, we want to make sure that we have those ahead of time whenever possible. Sometimes I know it's difficult because we're all doing a million things at once and wearing different hats, but if we have the opportunity, it's preferred that we share those slides ahead of time, both with our presenters and also our third-party services, especially with interpretation. It is good for our interpreters to have that information ahead of time so we can study it, prepare, and be ready to go. And if we have any questions on that information, we can ask the presenter ahead of time so that we can have clarification. And the same with another third-party service, which would be perhaps a different presentation platform. We had a meeting recently where the platform was completely different, and we all had to be re-educated on how to use it because that was a portion of the presentation that was going to happen through Zoom. So prepare, delegate your responsibilities to different people so that we can all check all the boxes and be ready to go by the day of the meeting. When we go into recordings here, we do have the option to do recording both in the different languages or different channels channels that you have. In the case of today, for example, we have English and Spanish. One person can be recording the English version and another one can be recording the Spanish version. It's very important that the person that records each and either of those channels stays on that channel the entire time for the recording to be a good recording. So we want to designate someone to do that ahead of time so they know how to do it, they can be prepared to do it, and it can just happen seamlessly during your meeting and without issues. And that way you can present that material later on to your audience, to the public, or share it on your media platforms if you choose. Moving on, testing. Testing ahead of time is very important. Let's say that we've already made contact with our third-party services and we have videos and audio that we're going to share. Let's make sure that we have that ready to go, that we tested it on our system, that it's compatible with our computer. If they're sharing from a cell phone, which has happened, is that going to be okay, or do we need to have a separate plan for that? We want to make sure that we're also familiar with the different features on Zoom. So like I mentioned before, the interpreting feature, we want to know how to use it, make sure that it works well with the information that we are presenting, and also have that information ready to go for all the different parties like I mentioned before. We want to run a quick test within ourselves, maybe a day or two before the meeting, to make sure that it's all good to go, that we don't have any hiccups, and then get ready for the meeting. And on the day of the meeting, we want to make sure that we test again right before the meeting. We have a practice that we also get in 30 minutes before our meetings. And when I say we, I mean the interpreters. And we test the interpreting feature to make sure that it's working. Usually that allows enough time for the host to also run any kind of slides they may have for their presenters, to perhaps check the audio or the videos real quick and make sure that nothing's changed, that everything's still good to go, and that we are ready. So moving on to the next thing that we like to do is have a plan B. What if you did everything right and something still goes wrong? Your slides are not showing for your presenter, or the connection's iffy and they cannot show the video, but you can still hear them and they can continue their presentation, they just cannot show you their presentation. So in that case, it would be good to have your backup plan. For example, having your host monitor the different slides, and your presenter can be speaking and presenting the information on the slides while the host is clicking them, so that we can continue our meeting and not have to stop because of a little technical difficulty. And that's just one example. Everyone's meetings look different, and we all have different types of information that we share. And so that's just one example for what would we do if. This is especially important if we know that we have a computer that sometimes does a certain thing that maybe doesn't allow us to continue with our meeting, or if maybe it shuts down on us after a certain amount of time for whatever reason. It really depends on what happens with your material, with your equipment, with your different modes of sharing. And if you know that that particular device has finicky functions or does something weird, and you're still going to use it, what will you do if that happens? And what if it happens anyway, when you have a device that it's perfectly good and all of a sudden it does something funny? Then maybe I'll have John take over. If I'm Sandra, I would just say, you know, John, if for some reason my presentation is not working, or you can't hear me anymore for a certain amount of time, continue with the presentation. Here is the agenda, and these are the next steps, and I will work on getting myself back in if that were to happen. Obviously, this is perhaps worst case scenario, and we hope that this never happens and we don't have to think that way, but it's just a good habit to have as to what do we do in the event of a certain situation. Another good example for us as interpreters in doing the third-party service, we communicate with each other constantly when we are interpreting for a meeting such as this, and we are doing all this behind the scenes. So if something were to happen and one of us, for example, starts coughing and the other one is listening and they cannot continue their interpretation, we immediately take over and continue seamlessly so that our colleague can recuperate and be ready to go again. And if we can make that happen in a few minutes, great. If it takes longer, it's fine, because we already have the interpretation taken care of and the meeting will continue. Going into the next steps, same thing, like I was saying. So what happens if a certain situation appears? What are we going to do then? And so you can come up with a plan for what works in your company. If it's a in-house meeting, what would you do if X, Y, and Z, and how do we want to handle that? Moving on, we want to go to be ready to pivot if needed. So we have the plan, we've done the testing, everybody has been assigned to do a duty, and yet the presentation is faulty or something's not working. Or let's say we have a high-profile presenter, perhaps a governor or something, showing information, talking to our audience, and suddenly we lose them because of a connection, because of some other reason. What do we do then? Do we continue the meeting? Do we pivot and start having a conversation while our presenter gets back on track, or we can get him connected again? Or do we just sit here and kind of wait? What is your preference? What do you want to do? What do you want your audience to see if that were the scenario? What are your priorities? Is your priority to continue the meeting, with the governor, for example, and is that the only thing that matters at this moment? In which case, we would probably send out a message to our audience that we are trying to get them connected again, and we'll be back momentarily. And so perhaps take a break there, or figure out if you have the time to do that. Do we have time to wait and try to reconnect, or is this a time when we need to decide if we will reschedule because we've tried a number of things and it's just not working? And so that would be, what's the plan now? So in the event that something like that would happen, what do we do? What's the plan? Do we continue the meeting? Do we do Q&A at this point? Or perhaps have a survey? Things that we had already planned ahead of time for this particular presentation. Is that an option? Is that something that we can do now while we get back on the agenda? The day of the meeting, we want to make sure that we go in ahead of time and have that pre-session I was talking about. We want to test everything one more time, make sure that it's working, that all the audios are connecting with each other. We have a tendency to use Bluetooth a lot, so if we are connected to the wrong device, that would be a hiccup that we'll have to figure out, and we don't want to be dealing with that when the meeting is already happening and we can't hear each other or they can't hear us. We want to make sure that we're good to go when it starts. Run a quick test for your presenters, the audio, the slides, your interpreters, make sure the channels are working fine, and then you have the information and instructions ready for your audience. And if you have a bilingual meeting like we do today, you want to make sure that you send out a message to the waiting room or your attendees about what's going on, so that they know that they're going to be let in soon, because they will be waiting to come in. And if the message is in one language only and you're expecting monolingual folks that only speak Spanish, perhaps, they won't necessarily understand. And sometimes they could get out of that meeting thinking that they're in the wrong meeting. So to avoid any confusion and to just be as clear as possible and to make sure that you are inclusive and communicative with your attendees, you want to make sure that you are communicating clearly and directly with everyone. And then we're going to move over to communication is key. This is during the meeting. If something were to happen, like the examples that I mentioned already, we want to make sure that our panelists know that they can go to John or Sandra and say, my computer is not working, I'm frozen, whatever the case may be, and get some sort of help for that. Also with your attendees, like I had mentioned before, if our governor is no longer able to present, what are we going to do? Do we move over, or do we, pivot and say, okay, now we're going to do this while we figure that portion out and get back to that in a few minutes or something like that. And just be clear and honest with your attendees. We are all used to this. We've been doing it for a year now, and we're very patient, we're very forgiving. We just want to know what's going on because all of us have jobs. Our meeting is probably not the only meeting they're going to have today, so we have a schedule to keep to, and we want to make sure that if I have an extra 10 minutes to hang on with you because of this error or hiccup, that I want to stay with you or to have the choice to leave if I need to. And then communication with each other. Also, the panelists, if something happens and one doesn't show, what order are we using now? Are we comfortable with switching, X panelist to go before this other panelist, or should we do it together, or do we still need to present the information for the person that didn't come, and how do we do that? And those are just examples. Again, this is by no means the golden rule, but they are just good habits and good practices that we've discovered through working in virtual meetings all of this year, in all different scenarios, from community meetings to small group meetings, internal meetings, different things like that. Moving on to stating your expectations and your plan. This is both for your audience and for your panelists. So again, we're still in the category of the day of the meeting. We are going to make sure that we tell them, once again, panelists, you were going to have 5 minutes to speak. We will interrupt you at the 5-minute mark, for example. As your attendees, you can tell them, we want to make sure that you know where you can find the Q&A. Be sure to put your questions in there, and we are going to answer them as best as we can. And if we cannot get through them today, we will follow up with an email or something like that. Whatever your practice may be at your office or your business, how do you want to interact with your attendees, and what kind of information do you want to give them so they can feel included and that like they're being listened to. And then the other one is just a little video here as to how else can we interact. So if we are going to have an open discussion, we want to make sure that we verbalize that to our attendees as well. So say something like, on the mark at 10 a.m. today, we're going to promote our attendees to panelists, and you'll be able to speak so that we can have a conversation about this topic. And then if there are any further instructions you need to give them, then you would do that at the time. In the case of bilingual meetings, you would want to let them know that once they get upgraded from attendee to panelist, they have to reselect their preferred language, because Zoom will go back to the default, which is English. And so you want to make sure that you click Spanish again if you wish to speak in Spanish during the meeting. Also, you want to plan ahead. Do you want to have breaks? And what does that look like? Are you going to have a break every 40 minutes, every hour? It really depends on how long your meetings go and how you like to have the flow in your meetings. Particularly if this is an internal meeting, do you want to keep everyone engaged and alert? So do we want to give them a break at this mark so that they can go to the bathroom? Or do we want to do a movement break where one of us perhaps, or a guest, can guide them into some gentle movement in your chair, just so that we can maybe get up and stretch a little and giggle together and still go to the bathroom perhaps, and then come back refreshed and ready to continue with the meeting, especially if we are going to go for another full hour or something like that. When we re-enter the meeting, whether this is because we were in a different feature, so perhaps we were in the breakout rooms and we were having our own conversation, or we just took a break and we are ready to come back. We want to make sure that we are very aware of the settings and what that looks like, both for us and for them. If we were in the breakout rooms, when we come back, the same thing would happen with the multiple languages option, where we would have to re-click our preferred language, because Zoom defaults to the primary, which is English. And so we want to make sure that everybody continues to be engaged and that we don't lose them when we come back. Also, sometimes Zoom will boot you out. That did happen a couple of times to me, and it was interesting. I'm not sure what happened, but if that were to happen, we need to be ready to help. We want to make sure that our attendees, our students, our audience is able to get back on without a problem. So whoever our tech person is should be ready to go and jump at it if it's necessary. It's recommended to have an interactive activity when you come back, perhaps a survey, perhaps questions and answers, something that gets people engaged again and ready to continue to the next topic. That's just something that has worked for us in the past, and so we like to share it. And so then just have an efficient meeting, you know, make sure that everything is taken care of, that all your information is shared effectively, that your third party is supporting you without any glitches on their side. Go ahead and handle your questions. And again, what does that look like? Are you going to be doing it on Q&A? It's the host going to be repeating them, which is generally what we see. And also, will you be having it answered live, or do you want to perhaps answer in the chat, or will you be doing open conversation or discussion about the topic and handle the questions at that moment? And then you want to also let people know, your panelists, if it's an internal meeting, for example, if you're going to be sharing the slides for the presentation, and when will that be, so that they can review it, or for anyone that couldn't make it to the meeting. Will you be doing any kind of follow-up? So if we only covered half of the material, or if this is going to be a series of meetings, when is our next meeting? What kind of assignments do we have after this meeting? Or do we need to get together so that we can work on X project that we need to do prior to the next meeting? And then also you want to make sure that you let people know when the next meeting is, of course, and then just wrap up any other details that you may have available for your presenters. And I apologize, that was a whole lot of information all at once. I just wanted to make sure that I respected your time today and that we had time for questions if anyone would have them. Once again, I'm here. Thank you to Global Language Services. This is Elizabeth Velasco's information. Feel free to reach out to her for any kind of interpreting, translation, facilitation services, or go through the Garfield County Libraries.
Stay tuned for the notice for our next Business and Breakfast, the one in April. You'll all receive an email, and we'll have a press release on that as well. Thank you again, Claudia and Global Language Services, for presenting today. I know that we've all been using Zoom, and I just want to say I really appreciate you guys, the people I work closest with. I think so. I'm definitely thankful you guys are there, and you guys are really professional and really know what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for the meetings.
It's our pleasure. And I also just want to take a second to thank our interpreters today. I'm sure they did a fabulous job. I couldn't hear them today, but they're awesome. We're a great team.
Yes, thank you, B and Daya. Okay, so we'll be ready to close for the morning. Everybody have a great Tuesday.
Thank you, everyone.